today's video, I'm going to show you two things. First, I'm going to show you how to dynamically change the text color of the text that you put into your ggplot. This means that you can use lighter text colors on darker backgrounds and the other way around. This makes sure that your text labels are always visible, and afterwards I'm going to show you the second thing, and that's the marquee package. It's a great package and I'm going to show you all the kind of cool things you can do with it and how to customize the text that you put into your ggplots using that package. And in case you don't know me, my name is Albert Rapp, I am a mathematician and data scientist, and on this channel I help our users with typical data science tasks like making sure that your data visualizations are nice and that the texts in your data visualizations are great. So let's check out how that works. Let's start with creating a new code chunk in our Quarto file and loading the tidyverse. And now we need a bit of fake data, so let us create a new table, which we fill with just a column called value, which has the numbers 1 through 5. This is nothing too fancy, it's just to demonstrate how to make the text behave according to the values later on. Let's save this in a new data set for now, and then we can take this data set and pass it to ggplot, where we map the x static to the value we've just defined in our data set, and we leave everything on the same y coordinate, and then we just add a gm_tile layer on top of that, where we fill the rectangles according to the value inside of the value column, and then we can just throw in things like width, height, and making the outline color black. And with that we do get a couple of tiles. They don't really look rectangular right now, even though we've specified that width and height should be the same. That's because the aspect ratio of the axes are not 1:1, and we can fix that by adding a chord fixed layer on top of that to make sure that the aspect ratio of the y and x axis are 1:1, and then things look rectangular. Additionally, we can throw in a scale fill gradient layer just to make sure that the colors look nicer. So we're going to use white color for lower numbers and a fire brick for a reddish color tone for the high numbers. And that way everything kind of looks a little bit differently. And that's good for our purposes here, because now we can practice adding labels into these rectangles. And we do see here that the things that go into the white box on the left should have a different color than things that go into the really dark red box on the right. But for now, let us change the theme a little bit just to make things look a tiny bit nicer. Let's throw in a theme void on top of that so that we get rid of the axis things with the grid and so on, because we don't really need that here. And then we can throw in a theme legend position is none to get rid of the color bar on the right. And now to bring in the labels into this mix, let's add a GM text layer. And in there we can specify that additionally to the x and y coordinates of the labels that we specified in the top layer, we also need to specify the labels, which are just in this case the numbers that we have in our data set anyway. And then we can add a couple of small adjustments, like making sure that they're large, making sure that they're bold, and using a nicer font family. And if we do that, we do get the labels inside of the boxes. But as we've already figured out when we created these boxes, we see here that in the white box, the black text on top of the white background is really nicely legible, but as we progress to the right, we see that things become hardly legible. Basically, there's just too little contrast to make sure that the 5 here or the 4 are really nicely legible. And a nice way to change that is to make sure that when there is a black background, we do make the text labels white. And the simple way to do that is to just define text colors for every label that we want. And that's really easy if we just change the original data set by adding another column to that. Let's call it text color. And in there we can use the if-else function to determine whether the value is less or equal than 3. And in these kind of cases, we might want to have the black text color, and in the other case, we might want to have a white text color. And if we execute just this part here, we do see that if we look at the data set, we now have specified a text color for all of the values that we have inside of here. And now all that we have to do is to go into our GM text layer, and in there outside of the AES specify that the color is supposed to be taken from the text color column, and then things look exactly like we'd expect. Now we do have a better contrast with the labels and the background. It's important to know that we do use the color argument outside of the AES call, because here we now specify for every label that we create, use the colors that we have defined here. Here all of this works is because we have mapped the fill aesthetic to the value, and later on we have used the value to determine when we want to have which color. If you'd have categorical variables and not something numeric here, then things might look different, but the idea is still the same. Let's have a look. Let's just copy and paste this part here. Let's throw this into a new code chunk. Let's remove maybe this tidyverse loading here because we don't need that twice. And then let's just create a new data set. Let's call this previous column X. And now let's get the letters 1 through 5. This letters vector is just something that's in R. And now if we want to have these labeled as a column, we also have this name the column. Let's call it letter. For now, let's get rid of this part here. And if we now look at our data, we do have X coordinates and letters here. So we could use the X coordinate here, and this time we map the fill aesthetic to the letter instead of the value. And here for the value, we also need the letter. And this part is not really defined yet, so let's just get rid of this. And we don't need the scale fill gradient anymore because we do want to have something categorical here. And now we do see that we have different colors. These don't use a gradient because they are kind of categorical, or at least we assume now that we have categorical data because we use letters as the thing that we map to the fill aesthetic. And right now we do use the default colors here, which I try to avoid just to make sure that I have put in some thought into the colors that I want to use. And that's why we just add a scale fill brewer layer on top of that, where we use the set1 palette. And then if we execute this, we do see that we get different colors. And now what we can do to make sure that all of the labels are nicely legible is to replace the text color where we feel like the contrast with the background and the text isn't that great. And the idea for that is the exact same thing as before. All we have to do is more or less change our initial data set. Let's just copy and paste this part here. And here we have to think about a different condition which we want to use for determining which color to use. And here, since we're now in a categorical setting, we could just use our letter column that we have in our data set, and then we could check whether that is either A or D. And now if we execute this, the colors won't change yet, but we see in our data set that we have for the letter A and for the letter D, we do have a black color, and for the others we have white. And now all we have to do is to go into our GM text layer again and specify that the color should be taken from the text color column inside of our data set. And now things look different. I do feel like here we might want to do things the other way around. So let's just change the order of black and white here. And now we have the white labels for the red and purple box and black labels for the other boxes. So really in this vector here, you could just stick in the categories where you feel like, okay, there isn't enough contrast so that the label isn't nicely legible. All right, so this was a kind of neat trick to dynamically change the appearance of your text according to values, and you can use this strategy in all kinds of settings. Now I want to move on to something else where I show you where you can get full control over your text appearance. And for that, we are going to create a new code chunk. And in there, I want to call a new package that is called marquee. And this package is a fantastically new package that allows you to use all kinds of styling for your text. And most notably, you can use Markdown notation out of the box. Let's load this package for now. And then let's create a chart with some fake text. Let's create a variable that we call just mdText, which is just a text that contains a bit of Markdown notation. So this thing here should be bold because it's in 2 asterisks. And this thing here should be underlined because it's wrapped into these underscores. And now we can create a new fake data set. Let's just create X and Y coordinates and set them to 1 and throw a label in there as just one row. So if we execute this, we just get a very small data set here. And then we pass this to ggplot, where we map the X and Y aesthetic to the corresponding columns. And then we can add the marquee layer, which is a new layer that the marquee package gives us. And it more or less can serve as a drop-in replacement for GM text or GM label that you already know from basic ggplot. And in there, we can specify the label just like we would in GM text. And in there, we can also specify things like the size and the font family. And if we execute this, we see that the Markdown notation was already rendered just like we'd expect. And to make things look a little bit nicer, let's just focus on the text. Let's just throw in a theme void for now. And just to prove to you that this works as a drop-in replacement for GM text, let's just use GM text here. The code technically still works, but the text isn't rendered like it should. So that's kind of nice that we do have this new layer that uses Markdown notation out of the box. And in case you're wondering why we do get a warning message here, that's because there is some issue with the RStudio renderer, viewer, whatever. I have looked on GitHub and the maintainer of this package says that this doesn't mean anything in terms of actually the chart looking different, but you always get this weird warning message, and hopefully in the future it should go away. But for now, just accept that you will get this weird warning message. So as you can see, GeoMarquee gives you already a bit of more things that allow you to define styles, but it can do way more. The only caveat that you do need to take into account is that if something ever doesn't really render according to how you think it should render, you might want to install the ragg package, the newest version of it specifically, and set the global options and the graphics device to AGG once you've installed the ragg package, because if you've used ragg before, then you know that's a nice tool and you can get nicer outputs that way. So this is why I use that. But there's also been a bug in that package, and updating to this new version allows Marquee to do its full thing. So when you install Marquee, try to also install the ragg package immediately or update it, and then you should be good to go. Anyway, enough warnings and theory, let me show you more things you can do with Marquee. So in this GeoMarquee layer, you have another aesthetic called style, and in there you can use the classic style from the Marquee package, and in there you can specify things like the base size, the body font, and so on. And there's also a whole lot of other things that you can pass onto this layer. For example, what we could do is to change the weight of the font to thin. And if we do that, our text got a little bit thinner. Let's just compare. This is before, this is thin now. Unfortunately, I've made the experience that not all the things that you specify in here actually take effect. For example, if you'd change the size here to say 20, then nothing really changes. Well, right now it changes that there are multiple things that can match size. Let's check the documentation here. We want to have the base size. All right, let's just go with that. You see here, I can crank this up to all the way to 100 and nothing changes. And even if I comment out this size thing here, it doesn't matter what I put in there. So for some reason, it's weird that this classic style doesn't behave as I'd expect, which doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just not something I'd expect. But don't worry, I will show you all the things that Marquee can do for you and how to actually make these things work. For now, let's just remove this part here and let's just go back to where we were. And let's use the thing that works right now as a basis for our own style. Let's just call this my own style and throw this in there. And then we could use this style up here, and that way right now nothing would change. And now what we can do is to take our classic style here and pass this to the modify style function from Marquee. With this function, you can target specific parts of your text, something like headlines or paragraphs or code chunks or bold parts or whatever, and you can modify their styles individually. For example, if you do look at just the output of this classic style, you see here that Marquee has styling set up for all of these tags. If you do know HTML and CSS, this will be really familiar for you. Basically, these H tags are the headlines, headline level 1, headline level 2, and so on. Don't worry too much if you don't understand this. Right now, I will show you a couple of examples and then you can work with this. But for those of you who are already familiar with HTML and CSS, this should feel sort of familiar. And now what modify style can do is it can change the appearance of texts that are wrapped into specific text. For example, the P tag is usually used to denote things that correspond to one paragraph. And what we do have in our chart right now is just one paragraph with one sentence in it. So if we want to change the style of this thing, we can use the modify style function and target the P tags. And there we could specify things like we want to have Dodger Blue 4 as a background. And if we execute this, we do see that, well, we do have that background color now. We could also add a little bit of padding. so the edges of the background aren't as close to the text as before. And here we have used this TRBL function, which is just a kind of neat function that helps you to determine values for top, right, bottom, left. This is why it's called TRBL. And if you put in just one number, then all of the other sides will just use the same number. But if you wanted to use a different padding on different sides, then you could just specify the arguments for TRBL specifically here. But here I just wanted to have the same padding on all sides. And now let's make the color white so that we have nicer contrast and can see things nicer. And also the corners of the background, they're kind of ugly. So let's just smooth them out a little bit. Let's just make them rounder with border radius 4. And now you see that we have a nicer text box that uses these rounder boxes. And now if we were to modify our MD text variable here and throw in another paragraph, let's just add more text here. So because there is a whole line in between this line and that line, this will correspond to 2 separate paragraphs. And if we now execute this, we do see now that each of those text lines or each of those paragraphs will be styled according to the thing we have styled here. And if you don't want to have these 2 paragraphs separated by this white background, we could instead use the base tag here. And now if we execute this, we unfortunately see that the color disappears. And that's a bit unfortunate, but thankfully you can just use in geomarquee, you can specify things like the background and so on. So let's just throw in a fill aesthetic here and set this to Dodger blue 4. And then you'd also want to set the color to white. But the nice thing about this here is that these things here are still preserved. So if we don't have a padding here, you'd see that the edges of the background would be really close. So this is why the padding and so on still works. I'm not 100% sure if this is also intended behavior. Again, marquee is still very new, but if you play around with these things and remember that you can also still use the things that you'd use in classic GM text or GM label, then you can do a whole lot. So I'm not even complaining here. I'm just showing you how to work around when things don't quite work as you might expect. In any case, let's just go with another example so that you see more style things that you can change with the marquee package. For now, let's just make this into one line again. And now let's change our text here into something else. Let's just go with now, let's do part and URL. So this would be the markdown text to do, well, code snippet, well, an inline code and a hyperlink. And if you execute this, right now we still have the background here. So let's just remove the background and also the color. And maybe let's just make this not thin anymore. And now we do see that there is this light backgroundish color around the code block and also the URL. It's not really clickable. You can click it, but it does look like a hypertext. The thing is, what we can do now is to modify our style again and, for example, target the code blocks. For example, if you look at the classic style again, you see that one of the tags is code, and this will likely target the things that are inside of a code chunk. So let's modify the style for that. Let's remove this part here. And now let's throw in changes like making this part bold. Now the thing that is wrapped into this code ticks is bold. We could change the background to something bluish. Here I've just used the Dodger blue 4 color and made it really light. This function here will just give me a hex code for this very light color. I feel like now you can see the background of this code chunk a little bit more. We can change the border radius, even make this really large. Let's just go with 12. And you see that the corners are much rounder. And then we can change the text color, the font family, and we can also change the padding so that we do have more padding on the left and right and less padding on the top and bottom. So as you can see, marquee is a tool to have like really fine-grained control over how things inside of the text that you put into your ggplot look. And another thing that I appreciate so much about it is related to titles. Let's create a new code chunk, and in there, let's have a look at a large plot title. So let's throw in a markdown text here again. This one now has a headline indicated by the markdown headline notation, and then it has a really long text. And this is just to demonstrate how marquee can help you with text wrapping for your titles. But what we of course need for that is a plot. So let's throw in a plot here. In this case, we just need some fake data for X and Y coordinates, pass that to ggplot, add a point, and then we do have a point. And now let's add a title with this markdown text. And now we see that, well, we do have our headline here. Just to make things a little bit nicer, let's just increase the font size and change the font family. But this, of course, doesn't change the fact that what we have in our headline now or in our plot title doesn't actually look like the thing we want it to look like. And here is where we can, inside of the theme layer, change the plot title argument and set this to element marquee. And if we do that, we do see that the markdown notation is rendered as actual text. So this part, it actually became rendered as a text, but we do see that things go out of bounds here, and we do see that our super long text isn't wrapped nicely. But the nice thing about element marquee is that it has an argument called width, and you can set it to 1 or 100%, and then things are automatically wrapped for you. So I feel like this is one of the nicest features out there, because it really allows you to not having to set some line breaks into our markdown text manually. I feel like this takes up a lot of time whenever I have to do it. So really, I appreciate that this can just do what I want out of the box, or at least by just specifying that the width should be 100%. In any case, the same element marquee function has also an argument called style, which we can set to a headline style that we have to define. So let's just set the headline style and define a classic style for now. And this way, right now, everything works, but it doesn't look any different. So one of the first things I want to remove is the styling of this headline. More importantly, I want to remove this extra horizontal line that automatically gets rendered whenever Markdown is rendered. And unfortunately, if you look into the documentation of classic style, you do see here that inside of these arguments here, or at least I couldn't find it, there is no argument that allows you to change the way this horizontal line looks. But one simple solution I found to this problem is to just remove all styling from h1 tag. And this here is an h1 tag because it uses one of these hashtags. If you want to use a level 2 headline, you could use 2 of those, but here I'm using 1. So this is why I remove all styling from the level 1 headline. And now if I execute this, it's just rendered as regular text, and then I can throw my own styling on top of this. So once again, I just pass my style to modify style, and now I want to target the h1 tags, and there I specify that it should be bold, it should have a larger font size, it should have a bit of margin below, and it should use the Merriweather font family, and now things look a lot nicer. And as for the rest of the text, I might want to change the paragraph style to have a different line height, just to have a bit more room between the lines of the text. So as you can see here, you have a whole lot of control over how the things that you put into your title look. And what's really nice about this is that you can even colorize words in your text individually really easily. For example, if you wanted to have this super important information, you could just wrap this into these curly brackets. Right now they are in the text, but if you throw in a say dot red in there, then you see that this is actually rendered as red text. For some reason though, the line height now changed, so let's just set this to 0.5, and then things look nice again. And the nice thing about this is that you can define your own styles here by using, say, my style, and then you could throw into the modify style, you could just throw in the my style thing that you've just defined out there, and then you can just use your own color. Let's just use sea green in this case. Then you'd see that things became sea green. And this strategy is really powerful because now you can highlight or colorize single words in your title. And I feel like this is a super great strategy to avoid having to have a bulky legend. And in the past, I have done this using GG text, but I feel like this is the much smoother approach because it doesn't require you to write a whole lot of HTML and CSS into your text. Finally, let me show you one more thing that you can do really easily with Marquee, and that is adding text boxes to your plot. To do that, we want to throw an annotation into our plot, but since we don't have any real data in our chart right now, let's just fix the coordinate system so that things don't move around once we've thrown an annotation in here. So here we're just fixing the coordinate system, and then here we see we might want to also change the line height to something else again. All of these things interplay, so this is why once you change one thing, you might have to tweak some other number again as well. In any case, now we have a fixed coordinate system. Let's throw an annotation here. Let's just throw in an annotate. And in there, we want to throw in a marquee annotation. And as for the X and Y coordinates, let's just specify some. And for the label, we'll use the same Markdown text as before. And now let's add in a plus here so that everything connects. And now we see that our label is inside of the chart. And now one thing that we can make use of is the with argument from marquee, which gives you automatically text wrapping. And also we can just use hJust to move things to be left aligned with the X coordinate that we've specified. And now what we can also do is to set our fill argument again to get a nice background in there. And now what we see once again is that the headline has this thin line below it, and we don't want to have that. So this is why we use our style from before, our headline style here. And now we do see that this part is gone, but this doesn't look that nice yet. So we might want to change that. So let's define a new text box style by modifying the headline style later on. So for now, let's just throw this into a new variable. And now let's add styles to this. Let's start out by sending our headline style to modify style. And in there, let's target the paragraphs. First, we want to have a little bit of padding on the left so that things align nicer with the headline. And let's make everything a little bit larger. Also, I want to change the body tag of this whole text thing so that the whole text box can look nicer. And first of all, I want to have a nicer border radius. I do want to have a border color, but this won't take effect until I specify the thickness of the border. And here I just set this to 2. And now let's also throw in a little bit of padding to not have the background be as close to the text as we've seen before. But now you see one thing that is a bit annoying, and that is that this border and border size thing seems to be inherited from the body to also the headline. But I do not want to have the border inside of my box because I do want to have only the border for the box itself. So this is why we just modified the style of the h1 tag again, and we set the border size there to 0, and that way we got rid of this thing. So there you have it, a nice little text box using just Markdown notation and a bit of styling that was thrown on top of this. I do feel like this marquee package is really powerful and allows you to do a whole lot, but at some points, especially with this fill background, I'm sometimes left wondering, do I have to put this into the geom layer, or do I have to put this into a style? And why can't I just throw things into this classic style thing, but instead have to modify the style? I feel like these things are not really that clear yet for me, but once again, this package is kind of new, and I do see that it allows you to do a whole lot of text customization, which I think is great, which is why I'm really excited about this package, and I'm wondering whether you are too. So feel free to let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, I'm really sure that you are going to enjoy my data visualization course, and you can check that out by following the link that should pop up right about now. And if you do want to see some other ggplot videos, I do have a whole video series about that. You can check that out by following this link here. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.